My name is Olwen Fouéré, and well, I'm a performer. I'm a wanderer, journey person, a whole load of things, and I have a good life.
There you go. What a great end of interview. Take me back. I mean, I was preparing for this and going through your kind of body of work, and it's astounding, really. And we get into some of that as we go. But I'm fascinated by from hearing you talk in the past, and from watching, the documentary film, and from hearing you speak or reading interviews about what drives you. But I'm interested, kind of, you as a young girl growing up, looking back now, like, was that kind of life there for you from a young age? Was creativity and kind of performance or journeying always there?
I didn't really know about performance. I didn't know that it was a thing. I mean, I grew up in a very, remote part of Connemara, of Breton parents. So it was very much, we were probably there were hardly any foreigners in Ireland at that time. So we were very much the so-called French family in the middle of nowhere. And so I kind of, and we weirdly cut off. I mean, we had no TV. TV didn't come out there until 1960. And anyway, my parents, we never got one. We would always go next door if we want to watch television. I had very little exposure to anything else, really, to film or theatre. I mean, I remember doing plays in school. That was the kind of closest I knew to theatre. I didn't really realize it was a thing. And so it went on from there, but I see myself as, I guess, the journey aspect would be maybe the closest thing. I think I grew up I was a naturally solitary kid, a person. I still am. So my big relationship was with the environment, with nature, which is so powerfully present in that part of the world. So that was my big relationship, which then I think definitely sowed the seed for a kind of a curiosity and wonder about the world that we live in, aside from humans. And then gradually, I became more interested in humans as I grew a bit older. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I mean, what's interesting, because I mean, I love Connemara, love the West. I've seen you kind of online talk about Omey Island before. It's one of my favorite places in the whole wide world.
Yeah.
But also that sense of, and this might sound bizarre, but for a person who's had such a career, I mean, like, one of the last kind of decade or so, like River Run was a huge thing for you, and that kind of journey through Finnegan's Wake, which was very kind of wordy. But I always, bizarrely, you remind me of Silence, if that makes sense. It's like,
yeah, totally. Thank you for that. I'm glad I do.
Your work resonates with that silence, and that's interesting, kind of, for me, as that journeying space. Well, was there a time for you then? I mean, obviously, as you became, presumably in many different ways, interested in humans as a girl growing up. But was there a time when like, were you bookish? Did you read? Like, was there kind of where did you get your kind of inputs from? Was it purely from the environment, or did more inputs start to arrive as you kind of went into your teenage?
Very much from the environment, I think. But yes, we all read. In my family, we all read. We would all sit in the living room with a fire going, usually, and everybody would be buried in their books. There were 5 of us. Everybody would be buried in their books, and every now and then somebody would roar out laughing, and everybody would have to find out what they were laughing at. So it was very much but it was like, wasn't all kind of amazing literature. A lot of it was total trash, but we were totally involved in reading, and then film also, insofar as whenever we would go back to France or anything like that, we would maybe see television there. And one of my brothers used to do this thing we had a Super 8 camera and recorder. And one of my brothers used to get all these Charlie Chaplin films from this place in Dublin, somewhere in South Anne Street. I don't know what it was called. I'm sure it no longer exists. And would bring them down at Christmas time. So we would project loads of Charlie Chaplin movies on the wall.
Wow.
Yeah. So that would be my first really deep engagement with performance. I wish I still admire that kind of performance and that kind of comedy and depth, I suppose, in a way. Like I still think that comedians are the greatest artists of all. There's nothing like making somebody laugh, so that was really a deep engagement, plus the incredible skill that he had. And another thing that I was very interested in was circus. I traveled over to see my sister, who was living in London when I was 10 years old, and she brought me to the circus. That was my night out, or my day out.
Yeah.
That was a huge influence as well. And I think I would definitely have had a sort of a yearning to be a circus performer. I was very hyper flexible as a kid, so I could do all these really strange shapes. And so I think maybe contortionist was one of my first ambitions.
I would love to have seen your career guidance teacher notes then. That would be interesting. I want to I want to run away with the circus of being contortionist, please.
Be contortionist.
Yeah.
But just to refer to what you just mentioned about silence, I'm really fascinated that that's the word that comes to you, and I'm very heartened, I think, because it's so strange that when people, when I started off as a performer, people would ask me, what kind of work I'm interested in, and I would always say I'm just fascinated in non-verbal performance, and yet almost all of my work, with a few exceptions, have been so intensely involved with language and words that I don't quite know how they fit, but clearly they do.
I think it's fine. I mean, I think there's kind of there's a space, but for me anyway, there's a space created behind or within what you do that's kind of fascinating. I think even like, when was it, 2 or 3 years ago with Tremble,
Tremble, yeah, with Jessie, yeah.
I mean, that was just extraordinary. But it was the visual. It was kind of just obviously there was words in that, but to be up close with that, with you on that scale in the performative space was kind of fascinating. But can I ask, in relation to, I mean, obviously from Breton kind of parents living in deepest Galway, Connemara, and there's obviously a kind of melange then of kind of French, English, and Irish would have been around you, I presume, as well. So how was school? I mean, how was kind of that journey?
Yeah, school, as anybody with school-going children hates to hear me say, school for me, I regarded as a total waste of my life. But I really would have liked to have gone to our local school, which was 2 miles away. But it was but there were a couple of reasons why we didn't. One was because my parents would travel quite a lot in the off-season time. They would go back to France for my father for political and for business reasons, and my mother would as well, and of course all their families were there and everything like that. So they kind of knew they wouldn't be around much during some of the school terms. So we ended up being sent to boarding school in what is Kylemore Abbey, which is that.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And it was it was kind of a fascinating experience, apart from the fact that I was desperately, missing my mother and things like that, because I was very young when I went, 5 or 6. And, but they were interesting, that order of nuns, the Benedictine nuns, it was the only order of Benedictine nuns in Ireland. And they were very different in their kind of outlook, and they're very self-sufficient. One of the most impressive nuns there had converted from Protestantism, was a qualified lawyer, but she worked on the farm, and I used to spend a lot of time hanging out with her. she'd put me on a horse and off we'd go and things like that, you know. So, and there was only 5 of us under the age of, you know, in the supposed primary school. So it was a very, you know, it was very sort of, I don't know, very singular kind of way of engaging with school. And then when I was 10 years old, I was moved to a convent in Dublin and did my secondary education there. So I really didn't have the schooling in the West, which I wish I had, because I think I would have assimilated far more. And I think a lot of my early adulthood was about trying to become assimilated in Ireland.
Yeah, that, I mean, and you know, and I suppose then, but even from someone that, you know, had just one journey coming from Galway to Dublin, that's a big wrench, kind of, you know, coming from that side to the wilderness, to, you know, the metropolis of Dublin, and particularly at that age, at that transitional age. I mean, and I suppose being that, you know, in Clonmore Abbey, you can't get more religious than kind of, you know, going to a primary boarding school in, like, Benedictine or not, they were still order. And did that continue with that? Was it kind of religious secondary school that you went to? Was it?
Yeah. And I mean, you know, there were virtually no, I'm sure you know, there were virtually no non-denominational schools in Ireland at the time. So there wasn't much choice, really. I think the only non-denominational schools were incredibly expensive and kind of more like, you know, upper class. So it was kind of difficult to, and especially boarding school, obviously being relatively costly and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So so it was more, I mean, you know, I will credit the Catholic Church possibly for my interest in theatre, because a lot of those ceremonies, particularly benediction, was so theatrical. And I used to love benediction because it was so kind of paganly wonderful and beautiful. And we would learn to sing Handel's Messiah in 4 parts and things like this, you know. So I think a lot of my more ecstatic artistic experiences started around, you know, around these kind of high Catholic religious ceremonies, song mass, all that kind of stuff, you know. And I still do kind of love it. I still do kind of, you know, like, I love going into churches sometimes and just taking in all that sort of crazy sacredness.
I think you're right. I think there was a part of, you know, a psyche that, you know, that has kind of been lost in a way with of that crazy, you know, majesty, and
it was majestic.
But because of obviously the whole other side of it came crashing. But that sense of kind of ritual, that sense of which is so much of what it was about.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much that about ritual, the sense of the other, the sense of the infinite, the sense of a whole, you know, because it's quite cosmic, a lot of it, you know. And so I think in some ways that all tied in with my engagement with nature as well. So, you know, the whole thing that you would learn in the catechism about where is God? God is everywhere and in everything. I really felt that. And I still try to remind myself that to a certain extent that's true, because we are all of the same matter.
Come here, and then then when did theatre come creeping, or like performance come creeping in a real way?
Well, as I said, a couple of plays in school, and I remember that being quite a kind of intense and uplifting and challenging sort of experience that, you know, you could feel this kind of transformation that occurs in your body when you're performing, and you know, the adrenaline, everything, you know. So there were a couple of, you know, plays in school that we all did. And I remember actually when I was in secondary school in Dublin, there was one play we did, and I can't quite remember what the play was called. For some reason, I think it was Isagon, but I'm not sure if it was. And it was in English. It wasn't in Irish, because I don't really speak Irish anyway. And I had to play this small boy. And I still remember the line I had to speak was, "The flowers are white in the fisherman's garden," which was basically, you know, there's white horses on the sea. But I remember being in this sort of boyish persona and really enjoying it, you know. And then I think there were probably a couple of other plays, like I think we did the Lourdes one, about Lourdes, about Our Lady of Lourdes, and I probably played the eldest girl or something like that who saw her. And anyway, so I really got into that, and then I was given a sleep in the next morning after the performance, and then I came into class, which was maths class, and I was terrified of the maths teacher. She was a brilliant teacher, but she was absolutely terrifying. I still think back to various kind of neurosis I have, which were planted by my terror of her, and I came in the door, and she turned and looked at me, and she got up and she stepped off the podium and came over to me and shook my hand and said, "Congratulations." And I'd never, like, that was probably, I thought, oh my God, something must have happened if she does that.
Wow. And then I suppose, was there, obviously at some stage in one's life, one has to think about career and, even if it's, but like, I'm making money and kind of, was there an idea of, because did you start kind of training earlier on as a visual artist?
Visual artist.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I went through a whole kind of, I finished school when I was 16, did my leaving when I was 16. And at that time, you couldn't go to university until you were 17. So I had to wait a year. And in that year, when was that? It was 1970. So that was the real, like, kind of when hippie and free love and everything was really hitting Ireland. You know? And so I was like going around on my bare feet, and I never got into drugs much or anything like that, but I was very, I was all about freedom and lack of structure and all of those things. And I sort of rebelled against the idea of going to university or, I was sent to France for a while. That's right. I was sent to France, and I didn't last very long there. I came back again. But I sort of, I think I did a lot of journeying at that time in terms of where my path in life was going to go and everything. And I got very interested in the visual arts. There were two things. It was either going to be medicine. I was always really interested in medicine and in being a doctor, but not just a doctor, like a surgeon, or the arts. It was kind of one or the other. And I didn't have enough grades to go into medicine. I probably could have done the leaving again or something. But by then I was kind of, with my hippie lifestyle, the arts was pulling me.
Yeah.
So I started training. I didn't actually go to the College of Art. I started training with a Breton artist who was a sculptor in Bray called Jan Goulet.
I'm from Bray originally, and I remember.
Yeah, you remember Jan Goulet? Well, I used to study with Jan Goulet. He had these evening classes, and you could do all this training with him and pass exams, which would eventually get you a sort of teacher's diploma. I wasn't interested in teaching, but anyway, I went. It was my father who kind of said you should go to Jan. So that's how I started, and then it kind of expanded on from there. And then I just felt, I don't know, I wasn't really getting anywhere with it in my. I didn't feel that I was developing along a path with that, even though it was a great start. I think had I gone to the College of Art and discovered all the different ways that you could see and interpret or create, I probably would have stayed with it. And maybe I would have even discovered performance art, which was another thing that I didn't know existed. But in that time anyway, I sort of drifted away from it, and I decided, I started going to a lot of theatre, and that began to pull me quite a lot. And then I thought, well, maybe it's theatre, maybe it's like theatre design or something. And but the only in I could find was through classes that were going on in Dublin City. So I went to, I started working. I got a job on the dig, the wood quay dig, digging finds and drawing, not digging the finds, drawing them and cataloguing them. It was a wonderful job. It was amazing, like the stuff that would be found, and we took it for granted at the time. So I was working on the dig for about 6 months. And in that time, I started going to these classes in the gate run by Christopher Casson. And that's how I kind of, and it was very, he was such a lovely man, but it was all about, it was kind of about elocution and a particular very traditional way of approaching. And I mean, I don't know if I learned anything really, but that was a sort of beginning of some kind. And then somebody told me about the Focus Theatre, and I had seen a couple of shows at the Focus that I'd been incredibly impressed by a few years beforehand. So I started going to these weekend sessions in the Focus. And then after a few months, I was cast in one of their lunchtime shows, and then in another show. And then Jim Sheridan came to see me in another show and asked me to come down and work with them in the project, and it went on from there. So I was working full-time professionally for about 2 years before I decided whether or not it was a good idea to continue.
So, I mean, from speaking to people around that time as well, there was something really, I mean, you mentioned kind of, the early 70s and the kind of hippie, 60s arriving, in Ireland, but I think as well in theatre, there was around that time with the birth of the project and Focus, there was a very European, let's say, and kind of like political with a small p rather than a campaigning artist kind of, or all about class and place. And I think, you've been involved, you were involved in obviously the Risen People and like Famine After, and like that, they were right, that those plays and the people that kind of gathered around those plays have had major influences right to this day, in the formation of the, I suppose, the context within which we all work. But as it ever is, at that time, it was just happenstance. It was like,
yeah. No, I mean, I'm so glad to hear you say that you feel that influence has continued, because it was an extraordinary time. But I didn't know anything different. None of us knew. Most of us just thought this is how it is. And I thought life and theatre were going to be like that for the rest of my life. It was all going to be that kind of madness. I mean, aside from the really interesting, eclectic kind of work that was happening, and that very deeply, I suppose, politically committed, but not with a capital P, sort of subversive, I suppose. It was a kind of subversive energy there. And it was different in every theatre, but the project certainly for a period of time was like the place where so much was happening. You couldn't get in the door of that place. It was so full of people every night. I mean, people who'd never been to an art centre or a theatre before, it was an extraordinary time. And there was a great mix of the arts within it as well. I often tell people, that you'd be going into work to do the show at night, and you'd pass by Nigel Rolfe in the foyer, which was also the art gallery, and he'd still be rolling around in flour or whatever, for the third day or whatever, without having stopped. And you just take it in your stride, It was a fantastic fusion of art forms, I think. So it was a very, very special time that I feel incredibly fortunate to have experienced. And it was in the middle of that time that I decided, I actually did take some time out to think about, will I continue doing this? But the work was so fascinating. I thought, well, I'm going to keep doing this for as long as I'm interested. And well, I keep threatening to give it up, but I'm still here.
There you go. That never worked out.
Yeah.
You got your exit strategy quite correct,
Yeah.
But I suppose in that, like say that decade, whatever, the 15 years, I mean, there's kind of a lot happened. We talk about operating theatre in a minute, but also the kind of, I'm fascinated to hear you say about the performance art space and the wildness of nature and the attraction of that. And interested in the medicine piece, because I think again your work, there's a precision to it, which is nearly, I don't know, it's kind of not to get too kind of I don't know, but like it seems to nearly fight against itself, which makes it very exciting. Do you know what I mean? It is kind of
interesting, yeah.
Kind of, you're kind of waiting for you, like all great singers, you're kind of waiting for you to not hit the moment, or not. It's kind of, it's raw, but it's kind of a very precise raw, if that makes sense, right? It's like people, like someone like Billie Holiday, you're kind of going, you know she's going to hit the note, but you're kind of also going, oh,
Oh yeah. Oh, great.
and that's fascinating because even in very precise work, which and even back in those days, you know, you were going from playing major roles in classic plays, you know, through say the method with the focus to the beginnings of what became operating theatre, to the risen people, to whatever you're having yourself in between. But yet, and throughout your career, when you kind of have flowed between those spaces, which is very interesting because it shouldn't be, if you know what I mean. It's kind of it's like you're kind of that scientific piece to it up against the madness.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah.
But I mean, back in those days when you decided to kind of do it, it also strikes me that you also had a different part of your expression. It wasn't just about going and doing plays for people, or just about being an actor, or just, you know. So I'm not demeaning it by saying just, but for you, it was kind of also.
Oh yeah.
You mentioned performance art, but that space of kind of not knowing what the hell it was and where you wanted to express it, and that really started to kind of live then again, or not live again, but kind of grow when with operating theatre and with that time. And was that kind of a conscious decision for you?
Yeah, again, this is a sort of like, you know, follow the path and it'll bring, you know, it'll bring you lots of unexpected things. But that was kind of quite early on that operating theatre was formed. It happened while I was still working in the project, and somebody said, put me and Roger Doyle together, said, you know, Roger's looking for somebody to perform one of his pieces. He wants typically it was like he wants a dancer who's not a dancer. And so we went into this room together, and he played me this piece that he wanted to be performed, and I had this instant kind of recognition. It was, I often say that about Roger's work. It's like our planets are sort of kind of fairly neighboring. You know, they're not the same planet, but they can kind of see each other. And there was this kind of recognition in listening to this piece, and I think it did answer that thing in me as well, which I had already started to express, that I was really interested in nonverbal theatre. And there was something in that piece that kind of married with this aspiration, I suppose. And I suppose about a year or two later, Operating Theatre was formed as a band and as a theatre producing company.
Yeah. Well, I love that. It was formed as a band. I think that's just so cool. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like it was a band who did plays, you know, or whatever.
Yeah. It was a band, and we did bring out a few singles and everything.
Wow, I didn't know that, really.
Yeah. Well, I should send you some of the singles. Actually, I got one video. Well, actually, I only have the video of myself and Roger playing on this arts show in RTE, which was more of a demonstration of the Fairlight computer synthesizer that he was working with. But we were 4 members of a band, and we did bring out 2 or 3 singles before it. Well, we carried on bringing out stuff, but you know that we were a real like band, except we never played publicly.
I know loads of those. And around that, I suppose, you know, throughout your career, you've had people who you've kind of developed collaborations with, or kind of developed, you know, lifelong or career-long relationship with, through operating, obviously Roger, but also further on Paul Keoghan and Selena Cartmel kind of would have, you know, there would have been, and I suppose there's interesting, again, the range of work that you've done, from kind of being like from the developing first roles, like, you know, from Rena Carr, or even like work written for you, and then to take on these kind of classic works in, you know, proscenium shows, to you know, your own work. Is there not is there a method, but is there a way, like for you, does the feeling of being live transcend all that? Do you know what I mean? Does the feeling of kind of that performative space transcend the work that you're in? Is there a place that you try and get to with all that work?
In the live situation?
Yeah.
No, definitely. It's the same place. Whatever that place is, it's this it's this, it's not even a place, I suppose. It's a kind of, it's a space, which no matter what the piece is, that's what, that's the, that's the space it happens in.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, of course, it probably, you know, changes its forms and everything like that. But and it's a really difficult thing to articulate, because it's a sort of a felt thing. It's a kinesthetic kind of thing, and you know it when it's happening. Audience knows it when it's happening, and it's a rare thing. But it's like, that's why people go, and that's why we do it every night. Is for those moments where you go, oh my God, everybody is vibrating at the same kind of place and level, and something is taking place. There's a transformation occurring, and it's felt in the body and the hairs on the back of your neck, you know. um and it's rare,
Yeah.
but that's why we all do it, and that's why we go.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's that, and it's kind of that's the moment when you feel the whole theatre sit forward a bit. Do you know what I mean? That it's kind of yeah.
Yeah,
Moments for you then, like, you know, and again, I'm going to jump back and forth here because, you know, as we wander, but there's a moment, like, I think, you know, Salome was a big moment in Irish theatre around that time. Because again, there seemed to be you know, threads that had been born all over the place, but certainly the internationalism that had, say, started and Focus and Project, and, you know, that sense of the European, certainly there was one of the moments when that coalesced within that production, which, I mean, God, it took off. And I mean, it was an extraordinary production. But again, was it just one of those, or were you aware, like, did that kind of trigger something special in you? Was it that kind of an awakening?
yeah. Well, I mean, I was a big admirer of Stephen Berkoff's work. I had come over to England in the, I can't remember when it was. It was probably late 70s, early 80s. I'd come over to just kind of see what was going on. Also because a lot of people would leave and go to London, and so I just thought, and known as the kind of centre of theatre and all that kind of stuff. But I had to say that a lot of what I saw didn't impress me hugely, apart from Stephen Berkoff, and I just thought his work was absolutely extraordinary, as a performer and as a writer, and as a sort of a real explorer of form. Like, there was nobody else that I could see in England doing that kind of work until people like Complicité came along, and so I was a big fan of his work. Early on, one of the earliest things that I did as well in that vein was a production of The Fall of the House of Usher, directed by Peter Sheridan, with Mannix Flynn and Garrett Keogh, and Roger Doyle on the piano.
Wow.
And it was an amazing experience, and so that was already planted there. And I think I can't remember if I met Berkoff at that time. I don't think I did, but anyway, when I knew Salome was happening, I really, really wanted to do it. So I did an audition. I think we all did. I think I did an audition with them. But anyway, you know, I didn't get it, and then I got it. And then he went around telling everybody in the company. I suppose we can still say this. We're not going to be solicited by it. They went around to everybody in the company and told them, each woman in the company, that he had wanted them to play Salome. That was that's how he operated. But actually, we ended up getting on. I mean, we had terrible battles, but we did a 4-week rehearsal. I just said, this work is too valuable to waste time rebelling or giving out to him for being a bully or whatever, and just got on with it. And it was a real coalescing of lots of different streams. They all came together, you know, the main stream and all the other stuff that I'd been doing, and it all kind of came together in this really amazing kind of form. Funnily enough, actually, last time I saw Stephen, because he's been over doing Vikings or something. And he got in touch with me, and we went out and had dinner under his photograph in the Trocadero. And we had the best night. We really did. It was a fantastic night. So I do see him as a sort of an important figure in the whole journey.
I mean, it's gas because like around that time I was in UCD, spending way too much time in Dramstock, and there was a gang that made, I was in college with Willie White and Conor McPherson, and kind of that kind of brood of people, and many more comedians. But it was gas because that performance, you could kind of go, oh look, Berkoff, because Berkoff was like a hero, and then you kind of going, Jesus, he's doing, and then you go and see it, you're like going, wow, that again pulled strands for an awful lot of people who were kind of, in their undergraduate years reading all this like work and having very little access to it because things had changed kind of, in Ireland as well. There was a lot of new companies starting to emerge then. And then over the next, I mean, brilliantly over the next time, like that went all over the place, and that, that just took off in a huge way. But then in the years after that, there was, the classics started to play a huge part in your kind of stage work. Ranging from like Les Liaisons Dangereux to like the Master Builder to Peer Gynt, and that, and again, do you find those spaces freeing as well? Like to bring, or is it a challenge for you to kind of, and I don't mean switch off part of yourself, but to kind of try and filter yourself into that structure?
Well, yeah, it's a good question and difficult to answer. I mean, I've always had that, and I still sort of have this thing where I if there's something I haven't done, I go, oh yeah, that'd be really interesting to just do it and try it and experience it, So I think some of the classical work that I would have done, that would have been the thing. And also just people ask you, and if you like it, you do it. Or if there's something that connects with you, you do it. Liaison Dangereuse was particularly interesting because obviously it was a very well-known French novel that had been translated into a play. So it had a kind of like a genetic interest for me, like, and there would be others. Also, I've always liked Ibsen, but I would say within that kind of classical structure, sometimes there definitely would have been this pressure to interpret female roles a certain way, which I found very frustrating or kind of diminishing of what I could offer. But that would happen in any play, even a modern play. It just depends on the whole. It depends on the kind of conservatism or whatever of the people producing and directing it and all that kind of stuff.
But I think there's an interesting energy there, to what you're saying, because I think that kind of brings a certain engagement to the room, even if you decide, okay, I'm not going to go there with this. The awareness that's there, kind of you can bring things to life even more than even without realizing it.
No, I know. There is that thing that that's therapists will often tell you this, that if you think something, it's effect. People pick it up, and this was actually something that I really believed as a child. Actually, if you thought something hard enough, somebody asked you a question, you didn't answer it, you just answered it in your head. I'm sure that's how I ended up in the theatre as well. but that they would pick it up, and it's so true. I was in a situation recently where I was really worried about a particular situation, and the people around me were not, but they picked it up without me saying anything.
Wow.
Yeah.
And through all that time, so the band kind of, yourself and Roger and the many people that kind of, came along that journey, was that a kind of a space, in a way, like your kind of lab, that kind of, was it a space where, you could experiment, was it a space that, like what grew into, obviously in more recent times, the emergency room kind of, seems to have kind of taken that space for you to be yourself in.
Yeah.
But how, like, I suppose I'm always interested in people that make their own work or kind of create stuff from themselves. And I always tell a story. I have a friend who is a brilliant sound producer, but before he kind of worked for companies or record companies, he used to develop his own albums, but he'd spend years mastering his albums. and you kind of call down to me, I kind of go, is that not finished yet? He goes, no, it's not. So the juxtaposition of only having 4 weeks rehearsals to get, you know, that mammoth of a play onto the stage, to having necessarily no deadlines in creation. Is that a struggle, or like, is that something that you kind of, are you good at kind of putting deadlines on yourself, I suppose?
Oh, I'm terrible. In a way, the deadline has to sort of, I might initiate the deadline in some kind of way, but it sort of has to be there. Although sometimes things just kind of burn in you so much that you just have to, you know, you can't rest. Like, you get up in the middle of the night and you start working on it or whatever. Funnily enough, that hasn't happened to me recently. And I'm wondering why that is, whether that's to do with the current situation that we're in relation to live performance, or whether I'm in a sort of a transition creatively into a different form. I have no idea. But yeah, but when you say that about your friend and you know, the pressure of 4 weeks rehearsals, I definitely think this is one of the reasons I became a performer, is in the visual arts. Had I pursued it, I think and I'm like that with everything really. If there's no finishing line, I am never finished. Nothing is ever finished. So theatre really makes you, and film does as well, really makes you accept the fact that this is as far as you've got. And with what I love about theatre is that maybe you'll get further tomorrow night, you know.
Yeah.
And you're always trying to kind of finish it, and it's never finished. And then, like, 3 months later, you think back to the way you did a scene. You thought, oh, for God's sake, why didn't I do it like that? Why did, you know, like, you know? So it's like I kind of love the fact that it forces me into to be humble enough to accept that I can't, you know, that's as far as I've got. Okay. And I think with visual art, I would be like your friend. I would never finish it. I'd either tear it up and burn it, or I'd be going, oh, no, that's not finished. I need to do more on that.
was Roger, like, was he kind of better at kind of finishing your work, like your work together, your collaborations then?
Well, no, I mean, Roger is like, he's a constant reviser. And one of my big bugbears with him would be the fact that when we'd be working on a new piece, he'd start taking stuff out of his back catalogue that hadn't been produced in any form. That's so lazy. You know, but of course, you know, they were always usable. But no, he's a constant reviser. I mean, you know, the I Girl, the opera that was premiered on Lyric a few weeks ago. Yeah. He sent me an email to say, I'm sending you a CD of it, with which I've done more work on, even though it's had its premiere.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think I'd be like that. And I mean, it's you know, the other thing is, because I'm doing so much film at the moment, my life seems to be so much film work right now. That's a really, really big thing I've had to accept, is not to drive the director and everybody mad by saying, oh God, I made a hames of that shot. Can I do it again? I just get to a point where I said, no, you know, I have to just be humble enough to go, that's what you did on that take. It worked for everybody else. And if you don't think it's good enough, too bad.
And there was also sort of, you know, again, there's been, for a career that spanned such a long time thus far, you've been involved in those kind of key moments, lots of the key moments in Irish kind of theatre. You know, project back in the day, you know, the Gate with Salome, and you know, on through Beckett, and but also with John Crowley. That again, that was time. There was time then in Kilkenny when again, which had put anchors down for a lot of people, and you know, can still be like Double Helix, and then kind of back in Dublin, six characters in search of an author, particularly Double Helix. Double Helix kind of again was one of those moments in time that, and Bickerstaff, and it being, I suppose, a space where work was being developed as an ensemble, and so the two sides of you, I'd imagine, were kind of.
Oh yeah, I couldn't wait to work on Double Helix with John, and the way he was working. It was so fascinating, and it was kind of it was sort of what I'd been waiting for, what I'd been looking for. So I remember pretty much turning down anything else that would have interfered with it, because it was something I really, really wanted to do. And actually, I still think it's the strongest of John's work was when he worked in that way. I mean, his work is always great, but I just felt that journey that he was on was so fascinating, and I'd love to have seen how it would have developed, over a longer period of years.
And then along comes Marina Carr, and
yeah,
I mean, again, I know there's been a lifelong association since then with Marina, and but my God, there's all we've spoken about the girl you were down in Connemara, out in the wilds, running away with the circus. What yourself and Marina have kind of created in those works. Was that a kind of immediate thing for you? Did you kind of go, oh my God, this is something that not speaks for me, but speaks to a part of me?
Well, the first time that I worked with Marina, and the first time I met her actually, was a play called Oolaloo, which I was asked to do a reading of it with Tom Hickey. So we did a reading of it in the project, actually, directed by David Byrne, not David Byrne music, which we'll talk about again. But that was my first meeting with her, and then that play was produced in the Peacock in '91. It was more, and it was lovely to meet her and everything like that. But I suppose the fire got lit far more when we did the May, because I remember when I read the May and the role of the May, I wasn't really that interested in the May, in her, in that role. I was kind of saying, oh, could I not play Grandma Freeklin, or something like that, because I thought she was great. But then I decided to do it because I just thought there was something, there was a kind of a journey in that I was interested in discovering. So the May was so utterly different to me in so many ways that I thought, I don't know how I'm going to access this. But in the performing of it, and in the development of my relationship with Marina, definitely the May was a really very transforming experience, and it was a really interesting thing where you put this a couple of scenes, particular scenes you might be performing where you would really feel the kind of disturbance in the audience, particularly the row scene between Robert and the May. There'd be couples there, and you could tell that a woman was really excited and kind of looking at him, like people were describing this to me afterwards. She'd be looking at the husband saying, no, you see, and him kind of going, oh, Jesus. But I kind of loved that flurry of disturbance, it was really, really great. But then things kind of developed onwards with Marina, and it was really by the Bog of Cats where I felt something is happening here, which is so primal and so deep. And I felt that it was whether it was to do with the fact that we had this relationship and that, there was a symbiosis of some kind. I'm not sure, but I just remember when I got sent this one of the early drafts of By the Bog of Cats, reading it in one sitting, and I was actually sitting up in bed early one morning and getting to the end, and this incredible kind of physical release of tears and everything like that, which I'm not that kind of person really, and I just thought, this is actually touching on something really profound in me as a person and as a creator, that I was kind of very grateful for it. It's one of the shows, most shows when they finish, I'm kind of glad and get on to the next thing. But this one, I actually felt I had to go somewhere and give thanks for it.
Sorry, just when you're talking there about the two Marina Carr shows, there was a period around that time as well. There was, you did a gorgeous, gorgeous wrong word, but a really, interesting Playboy the Western World with Neil Henry, but then there's also The Tempest. There was also like Ballymun. And I think it was an interesting, when I was looking at it earlier on today, an interesting time and space, like say in relation to kind of the feminine in those plays and in those places, and work maybe that was being influenced heavily by the work that you were doing outside those spaces, and the freedom, I suppose, that the wildness that Marina kind of was putting on our national stage, that kind of really, and you mentioned unsettling, but I think there was an unsettling there, that a very positive one. That was, you mentioned earlier on about, the restrictions sometimes placed upon, one in kind of classic shows, but also the life that's bred into them by explorations just seem to be kind of starting to manifest, it themselves around those times. And like, because it was around that time as well that Angel Babel kind of was
Angel Babel, yeah, was about 2 years after By the Bog of Cats, yeah, or a year or two after, yeah. Angel Babel.
And also Life is a Dream with Calixto.
Yeah. All around the same time, yeah.
Yeah. So I think there was that kind of, but I think in theatre, because I remember like the Galway Arts Festival was kind of really starting to hum around that time, and there was a different European. It wasn't your kind of, your kind of edge European. It was this kind of wildness of more Latin kind of, and in some ways for me that kind of linked back to very early Irish theatre, that kind of wildness of the land. But you were at the heart of an awful lot of that. And was there again, were you aware that your performance, that style was changing, but like that what you're performing on bigger stages was kind of changing or had more freedom to it for you?
Not really. I mean, apart from By the Bog of Cats, which definitely, felt like a first, if you know what I mean. A first type of experience. I wasn't that aware of it. No. I mean, these things very often only become evident in retrospect as well.
Yeah.
So I wasn't. I was probably just kind of getting on with it, whatever it was.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then, I mean, it's sort of, and I'm going to jump on a number of years. Because you mentioned dance and physical theatre, I mean, like working with Michael Keegan Dolan then, as well. Again, another space where, I mean, his brilliant journey has been kind of fusing those two spaces together with music. So was there great freedom in that kind of process, Olwen, for you as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, I very much wanted to work with Michael. I mean, if you had asked me in the late 70s, what aspect of theatre I wanted to do, one would be non-verbal and the other would be, I'd love to be a dancer.
Yeah.
But I don't really have, I mean, I can move and I can dance, but I don't have that kind of dancer training where they say to me, how do you remember all the lines? And I say, how do you remember the steps? Like, it takes me forever. I'm a choreographer's nightmare because I can do everything in improv, and then they want to do it again. I say, I haven't a clue what I did. And even like if I'm one day, I can't count all those things. So once I get it, I get it. But I'm a nightmare. I will say, no, I've got special needs. I need a separate session because I'm going to hold everybody back otherwise. But I was really thrilled to work with Michael, and it's just because, again, he's got such a great fire in him, and what he wanted to do, without even trying to articulate it too much, but I was very interested in what he was trying to do, so when he asked me, and I don't remember if I contacted him or did he contact me, I'm not sure how it worked, but because I do sometimes just take luck in my hands and just say, I'm going to write to so-and-so and say, I'd love to work with you, Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it backfires terribly. But I can't remember which way it was for that, but I was thrilled to work with him. And for me, actually, big attraction of working with people who work so physically is that physical discipline, because I just think, we put a lot of emphasis on the mental, the intellectual, and the language, but none of that means anything unless it's coming from the body, from my point of view. you know.
Yeah.
I think the body is where everything begins and ends, really.
Yeah.
So, and I miss that an awful lot I mean, now most companies, when they're doing a show, no matter, even if it's just people sitting around talking, they will have a whole physical thing built into the day.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the way that, you know, it took 20 years before that started to happen in any shows that I got involved with.
Yeah.
So I just loved the whole ethos of the creation of the work with Michael, where you sort of live and work together. And we were all living up in Shawbrook, getting up at 7:30 in the morning for yoga for an hour and a half, and then you have breakfast together, and then you sort of train and rehearse together all day. And I just love that kind of discipline, because I would love to have that kind of discipline myself, but I feel it's much more powerful if you're doing it as a company, you know, that something. And so the level, the way, you know, we became incredibly close through the work. It wasn't like hanging out in the pub afterwards, you know. It was about the actual physical discipline, the physical work, creating this other kind of form of bond and communication. So I was fascinated in doing that. I really want to work with them again. I mean, a couple of things came up and it couldn't work out because I was busy and everything. But yeah, I hope I still get a chance to work with them again.
And there was, again, around a time, there was Beckett as well. You know, obviously Beckett was kind of there before, but before the Gate Festival and Selena and Catastrophe, and you know, and then I'm fascinated with your relationship with kind of Beckett and kind of how you relate to that. Is that have a special place?
Yeah, Beckett was definitely, without a doubt, the first playwright that I identified with. You know, I mean, I was like, and Endgame was the second show I ever did, and I played Nell in Endgame, and I was in that bin every day listening to the whole play, and it's still my favorite play of all time. I mean, I still have lines of it coming through my head sometimes at the end of a day, you know. And I had an immediate affinity with the work of Beckett, particularly Endgame, and with some of the others. And then, funnily enough, as the years go on, like some you know, if I look at it this way, some of the writing for women I find less interesting, because they tend to be very much women of a certain class, you know, of his class, you know, that kind of more upper class Irish woman, but obviously that can be changed in production. Like I remember when Sarah Jane Scaife did 3 productions of, and she did them site specific, of Not I, Not I Company, and what was the other one? Footfalls.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Joan Davis and Breedney Nocton and I can't find the third person now.
Yeah,
it's terrible. If anybody listens to this, I'll forget who's the third person. Anyway, so yeah, so I'm, but of them all, Lessness was, you know, I came across this text of Lessness before I even became an actor. Just after he'd published it in 1969, 70, I think was published. I came across it in a bookshop, and I was a visual artist at the time, and I picked it up, this beautiful slim volume of signature classics that John Calder had produced. You can't get them anywhere now. They're collector's items, but it was, I just remember being so, I mean, that was a whole thing. It was a visual experience as well as a kind of literary experience, because it's the way the words were laid out on the page, and the typeset, everything just had a really powerful effect on me. So I had never known that, and I had thought at the time when I picked up that little volume, I thought, I'll make a piece out of this, painting or something. And then years later, I was asked to read at a Beckett conference, and I said, "Oh, I'll read Lessness." And when I read it at that particular, it was in Trinity, I immediately thought, no, I actually, this is a piece that can work with an audience. So I did, you know, 2 different types of productions with that with that piece. I was very proud of the last one, the one that we did about 4 or 5 years ago now, I think. Yeah.
I mean, it's fascinating because there's also kind of a great viscerality well, to every actor's work, but I think particularly, someone like yourself who's kind of, I mean, I'm not just in touch with it, but kind of who embraces that kind of that wildness, and to kind of go from the bold catastrophe. I mean, obviously, I'm not talking about necessarily in like relation to timeline, but like in a short space of time from that, like then to like the Titans, which kind of, again, how visceral of a play can you get? But it's like all those plays, the wildness is trapped in the confines of the language or the structure. You know what I mean? That's kind of like Beckett to me is always, his language is like in some ways pillars that are like kind of keeping stuff down. That is kind of like anchors. But through all that, there is a sense of that marriage for you of the physical and of the narrative and of the experimentation. But then, unfortunately, for you, there was a big life-changing incident that happened, around that time, maybe a bit later on, but kind of, you had a very serious accident.
Oh yeah, in 2004 or 5, I can't remember now.
Yeah.
I should remember. Anyway, 2004 or 5.
Yeah,
I did. But it was an extraordinary experience, like there are certain things that I go, oh, I wish I didn't have that scar on my leg or whatever, or also, nobody sees this, but the shape of my face and stuff like that, because I had 3 breakages here. But I was so lucky to survive. I mean, when I think about it, how I didn't die and how I wasn't killed and all of those things, all things I didn't really think about at the time, and how I didn't lose my leg and all that stuff. But it was 2 months in hospital. And obviously I had to drop out of a couple of shows that were on, that were on the cards. And I don't know, I mean, insofar as one can be grateful for certain traumatic experiences, I sort of was, in the sense that the kind of stuff I witnessed there. I mean, my family came to try and get me into a private room, and I was in the A&E, observation ward. And I said, no way, don't move me out of here. This is far too much going on. That's too interesting. I mean, I have so many incredible memories of that time. So I guess it was life-changing, but didn't really feel like that at the time. It felt like an event.
Yeah, but were you ever scared? I mean, it's an amazing documentary, that.
Yeah.
Here in the Flesh is incredible. And I mean, it's incredibly moving, but also incredibly insightful. I mean, was there ever a time for you that you kind of went, because obviously, you're an actress, a performer, and one that a lot of your work is very physical. And this was a very physical, damaging and very serious accident that happened to you. Was there those moments kind of going, oh, Jesus Christ, this is,
Well, I kind of did, but I was very philosophical about it. But I think you're often like that when you're in the middle of a situation like that. You're just dealing with the now. And I remember I used to joke and say, oh, well, if I have to lose the legs, Sarah Bernhardt managed, and, she carried on. While people around me were going, oh God, don't say that. Yes. But, I was kind of thinking like that. And then I was also thinking, well, if I didn't think I would end up in a wheelchair, but obviously at the time I had to be in a wheelchair. I could not stand up because all the blood would anyway, without going into gory detail. I thought, well, maybe I'll have to become a director and, or something else. But I never, they were kind of, I would muse on these ideas, not really think of them seriously, and I felt I would be absolutely fine. I guess I had a couple of, I remember having a couple of moments late at night in the ward where I experienced a kind of physical grief, is the only way I could describe it, where, I had all the symptoms of grief, but it was obviously grief for my body or for parts of my body that were damaged. And I remember kind of being curious about that in observation, thinking this is obviously affecting me very deeply. And I'm showing all the symptoms of grief, but intellectually I didn't really think of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I suppose, again, you know, the work that is required then to kind of, I mean, they're kind of lying in hospital beds and, you know, recovering that way. But then when you emerge from the cocoon of that, what was the recovery process like? You know, the actual, you know, physical recovery process for you?
Oh, ridiculously fast. I mean, I went into rehearsals 2 weeks after I got out of hospital, and and it was this extraordinary piece called Passades, directed by Selena Cartmel, based on Roger Roy's music, in this warehouse, which is kind of around where the digital hub is.
Yeah.
This empty warehouse. And I remember we just started rehearsals going, well, we don't know if we're going to get through it. You know, if something will happen that I'll have to stop or whatever. And we just so I started rehearsals in my crutches. And then, of course, the crutches then became part of the show. So you could keep them even though I didn't really need them anymore. And from then on, it was okay. But I had work like for a year. Work was lined up for, you know, there was another 2 shows I was going into. And I remember in the middle of one of those, and it went on tour to New York or whatever, and I was wandering around New York streets, and I got like plunged into this kind of depression, which I think was a kind of post-traumatic thing. Plunged into depression, going, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? All that kind of stuff. So it manifested in kind of indirect ways.
Yeah. And as you say, though, I mean, you kind of, in some ways, like you look at your work. I mean, I'm not using it kind of as a marker, but you kind of look at, you know, obviously you did an awful lot of work with Selena kind of in the years kind of preceding that, but also you kind of your own work, like the emergency room, you know, kind of started to kind of emerge for you. And it's funny, I was reading I was on your website or somewhere on your, about like work that the emergency room was about work that was necessary for you to do. Or something. Oh, Can you just talk about that for a minute? That's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, this, funnily enough, I was thinking about this before we started talking today, because the emergency room brackets, a necessary space.
That's it, yeah.
Close brackets for projects in need of immediate attention.
That's it.
So I think I always thought about it as, and I still have them. The emergency room is still there, but I sort of felt I needed a virtual space to put the ideas that came up that I wanted to explore or, you know, make happen in some way. But you know, I've never wanted a revenue to be part of a revenue funded company. I never wanted to be on that kind of thing where you have to produce, you know, a project a year or 2 projects a year, because that I've always felt I could honestly only be project driven, and it had to be something that I wanted to do and, you know, start from there. And of course it makes it more complicated, but there you go. So at that time I had there were a few things sort of that I felt and it was part of a kind of a split from operating theatre as well, because I said I really still needed that space, but Roger and I were kind of going in different directions. And so I think he set up a thing called general practice, and I was the emergency room. So we still remained connected. So that's what that is really. It's a virtual space to keep all the projects alive on kind of life support. Some of them make it and some of them don't.
Wow, that's great. Because I think it's great to have that space, liminal, or physical. And I think, you know, let's say looking at the last decade, you know, there's obviously River Run has played a huge part, you know, I'd say even time-wise in your life, and we'll talk about that in a second, but also there's been like the visual arts and that kind of space with, you know, obviously with Amanda Coogan kind of being part of the Yellow pieces. I mentioned, you know, the last couple of years, that Tremble, which kind of blew me away. But do you find that nearly a homecoming in a way, those kind of events?
Yeah, always. Yeah, there's always a kind of homecoming. I mean even today, Claire Langen's got a piece. Do you know Claire Langen, the visual artist, Claire Langen? She's got a piece going into this big exhibition competition. I think it's in, I'm not sure where it is, in Berlin maybe.
Yeah.
There's an artist called Yael Bartana, who I've been working with quite a lot, whose work is in the same competitions. I was saying to Claire about this, you know, worked with Yael Bartana, but I was thinking, God, it'd be great to work with Claire, you know. I didn't say it to her, but, you know, like that's always going on in my mind in some way. People I like to work with. So there's kind of a sense of coming home with that as well, yeah, because you know you're going into it's a different kind of a space to the producing, you know, live theatre kind of space. I guess it's different. And but just to go back to the emergency room, it's funny that you mentioned it, you know, because I was thinking about it today, going, okay, so what, you know, what's on the life support machine at the moment? Like I had a few of them, and I'm not quite sure at the moment which way, if any of them are going to make it. And then I'm going, what should I do now? But I think this may be a symptom of the fact that I'm doing more film right now.
Yeah.
Also the fact that live work is so I suppose so not able to happen. And that maybe it's a subconscious move away from it as a form of creative survival. I don't know, you know.
Let's talk about film. I mean, because you are, you know, you are doing a lot of film recently, and both your theater work and film has kind of, I mean, you've always been an international artist, but like particularly in the last kind of 5 to 10 years, it's been like brought you all over the world. But how's the film set for you? Because obviously, you know, it's a kind of, and again, you know, every film set's different, but I suppose in relation to, you've done work from, and my family are going to be thrilled that I'm talking to you because of Fantastical Beasts.
Yeah. With my brief appearance, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of went, I know her. So that was tick boxes all over the place. But like, I suppose working on big sort of Hollywood machines like that, and many others, to working on kind of, you know, which has done lots of more experimental short work or kind of feature film work. Is there, how does your kind of process engage with the cinematic world, I suppose, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so difficult, and I'm a total green. You know, I feel very green in the world of film. Every time I go onto a film or on set, I'm going, I haven't a clue how to do this. I wish I could find out how to do this. And maybe everybody feels that, but I've had such a long life in live performance. It's tricky enough. I mean, it's different doing something like Tremble, Tremble, which you've discussed and you sort of rehearsed and everything like that, and you know exactly where why everything has to happen and where. But in a film, or especially in a big film, you're really at the mercy of so many uncontrolled things you can't control. So the answer to it is, I think I've always been interested in film as an art form, but I almost think maybe more as a maker, you know, maybe if it's not too late, I'll make a film, or, you know, write and direct a film or something. But also I'm interested in it, obviously, as an actor and as a performer. But for me, it's been like just starting over again and trying to see and trying to trust that what I've learned as a performer up till now will somehow feed into the whole process. But I mean, there are some films I've done where I've just gone, no, this is so my world. But it was like for instance, The Survivalist, which is a fantastic film, I think, and a fantastic script. And I remember when I got that script, I said, I have to do this. This is so what I'm interested in, this particular world that he's created. And I remember some moments on that going, oh Jesus, you know, I haven't a clue. But I did feel, for want of a better word, at home in it.
Yeah.
You know, there are other things I do where I go, oh, I have no clue how this is going to be. So I've no real answer to that question that you asked, other than I kind of feel now I've got to do it in order to develop my craft in some way.
Yeah.
Further. I would love to be at the same level of craft with it as I am in live performance. Will that ever happen? I don't know. I think it's a really difficult process.
it's interesting though, again, from observing from the outside in, looking at your work on film, because the space you occupy in live space can be hugely large when you need it to be, which is brilliant. You know, what you've achieved is it's really like a reversal in your film performances. If you kind of suck it into yourself, it's weird. Like kind of it's you know your stature on stage are kind of huge. You kind of you go it's and I mean that as a compliment. It's not it's kind of you create moments that are magic, and in the film it's like you create this stillness. And I keep going back to stillness with your work, even though it's full of language and full of physicality. But I think for me, it gives you that opportunity to mess around with our heads and your stillness.
Oh, well, that's great. I'm glad to hear you say that. Funnily enough, when I was starting off all those years ago, my style, for want of a better word, as a performer would have been more suited to film, because I did work very internally. And then, the needs of live performance, it becomes expressed in a whole other way, plus the involvement of the body and everything like that. Of course, the difficulty in film is that, yes, your body you still need to be so engaged physically, but you don't think you do. It doesn't look like you have to, but you still have to be very engaged physically. But no, I'm very glad to hear you say that. I mean, I did 3 or 4 years ago, I got in touch with Jerry Grinnell, who's this fantastic coach that everybody, really admires. I got in touch with him and I said, because I knew him from way back from something else we had done before he was a coach. And I just said, Jerry, I really need some help here. I haven't a clue how to, and that is, if I could sum up what he said to me, and I try and apply it when I feel very, very lost. He had this great thing about that, because I said, I don't quite know, like with the camera, I have to be really aware of the angles and all that kind of stuff. And he sort of said, forget about the camera, or that you are the camera, in the sense that he had this thing about you bring everything, the camera, everything, and you bring it inside and it's almost in you. So it has that suction kind of idea that you use the word sucked, but and so I try and apply that when I get a bit lost, of going, you don't have to show it because it sees, so you have to bring it in so it can see inside.
Well, you can sense that, yeah. And back to the stage, I'm just talking about River Run. I mean, hey, let's do an adaptation of Finnegan's Wake for the crack. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like, again, but that came from like the emergency room, that kind of. So what was it, Olwen, or what is it?
That came as a kind of. I mean, it's interesting. If you create the circumstances sometimes for something to happen, something will happen. I really believe that. And that came. I was on tour with Terminus, with a later production of Terminus. It was. Catherine Walker, Declan Connell and myself. So we never performed in Ireland. We went on tour with it and ended up in the last 4 or 5 weeks was in Sydney Theatre Company. And we were performing that, which is incredibly demanding, as you know, Mark, Mark's work. But it was a fantastic challenge. And I was performing that, and then we were asked to do a reading in the National Library of Sydney for Bloomsday. And I said, I will. Yeah, okay, I'll do, but I'd love to read some Finnegan's Wake. So they thought that was a great idea. And I read the last page of Finnegan's Wake. And as I was saying some of those words like Ave Laval and all of that, and then the final amazing last line, away alone, last I loved along by the time I got to the last line, and I could feel this thing, when we talk about, the transforming moments, I could feel this thing in the room. It was incredible. And in me, and I stepped down from the podium and I literally said out loud to whoever was standing by me, I said, that's my next piece. It's the voice of the river in Finnegan's Wake. And that was like one of those rare tongue of fire inspiration moments. I wasn't looking for it. I had decided when I was on tour with Terminus, I'd even talked to my agent about it. I said, this is the last theatre piece I'm going to do for a while. I'm going to create a space for the unexpected to happen. That's exactly how I articulated it. And she thought it was a great idea. So I had turned down a whole load of stuff coming up, and I had created this space, and I thought, gosh, it'd be great. There'd be no pressure, and I'll be able to do whatever I like. And of course, this monkey jumps on my back of River Run. And so I didn't really get that space because it got completely filled by River Run. But had I not created that space, maybe River Run might never have arrived as an idea.
And the journey, though, I mean, there's one thing having that kind of, you know, fire moment to actually making it then. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
You know, very difficult.
Yeah, it was, but it was kind of difficult, but surprisingly easy.
Okay.
In the sense that you know, a lot of the times when I'm making something, I go, oh, I need to ask so-and-so, I need to get so-and-so, I need to do this, and I need to do that, I need to do the other. And I really I was kind of, once I had made it clear to myself that it was the voice of the river, which it wasn't an adaptation of Finnegan's Wake, the book, or anything. It was literally just the voice of the river. That idea planted inside me just kind of guided me. Okay. And I worked my way backwards, really, from the end backwards, until I found a beginning, which is the beginning of book 4. And I said, that's a perfect beginning. And I started to just literally draw lines in the book of the lines that I should keep and the lines I should leave out, and went through it like that. And then it was just a sheer process of working with people, or not with people, or reading the odd thing about it, where then it got divided into these sections, because that seemed like a better way of structuring it.
Yeah.
I always knew I was going to work very closely with a composer and sound designer. And then when I created these 7 sections, I started to realize that in these transitions between the sections, other stuff was starting to happen. But I literally think that it was almost like I was kind of watching it happen, you know? It was a fantastic experience from that point of view, is that I realized that I could only follow this thing, and the temptation would have been to get in touch with all the Joyce scholars and, you know, but no, I realized, and that's the beauty of the book as well, is that he's offered it to the world to author their own way through it, because that's the only way you can go through it. And I will never read the whole book, as I've often said. That's the bit of it and I'm so in love with sections of it still, you know.
Wow. Come here, I won't keep you much longer, but I'm just interested in, say, the last number of years. You mentioned, I mean, River Run took you all over the place, but also you mentioned Yale for Farber there a while back about kind of people you've worked with, and obviously doing Salome, you know, again 2 years ago, you know.
Oh yeah, I mean,
very
different Salome though. Yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah. But also there's been moments, and like things say that I haven't seen that I'm interested in, is like the work that you did over in Booth de Nord. Like what was that, you know, with that place? Just because I would have been a huge, or I still am a huge Peter Brook fan. He kind of had such an influence on my kind of headspace. But like that, working in kind of, you know, Paris with the character of kind of Paula Spencer, with, you know, in French, and then over in the project. I mean, was that kind of, that must have been amazing. I didn't see the piece now, I have to admit, but how was that? Oh, that was quite a journey. I mean, I'm a massive Roger Doyle fan, you know, and by chance this is how we ended up kind of working together. I mean, he wasn't deeply involved with it, but obviously I was deeply involved with the 2 books. But it all came about because kind of out of the blue again, like a lot of the best things. I was contacted by, I think it was when Sheila Pratchker was running the Centre Culturel Irlandais, and she had been approached by the French cultural attaché in Ireland, I think, about this initiative that had been set up by the French Ministry of Culture for the French European presidency that year, where they put funds into what they call the Projet Tandem, which was they wanted to support artistic pieces that were created by one French artist together with an artist from
a European country, another European country. So they started this initiative with every European country virtually. Now, a lot of them kind of fell apart, but some of them did survive. The one with Britain was Akram Khan and Juliette Binoche, which I never actually saw, but apparently that one happened. And there were a few others that happened. And this one, the director had already been chosen, a guy called Michel Abbé-Cassis, and we discussed, so we met and I said, yeah, I'd be definitely interested in this. So we met and discussed what the project would be, and he was very keen on doing The Woman Who Walked Into Doors. And I said, but there's been a fantastic, probably more than one fantastic production of that already. And then I came up with the idea of, what about it being Paula Spencer, who's 10 years later, talking about, is it 10 or 20? I can't remember. Yeah. Anyway, later talking about that period. So you mix the two books together. And so that's what we started doing. And it was, yeah, it wasn't, Michel and I had never worked together before, and he's not a particularly easy guy, but, you know, he's very gifted at the same time. So we did create something which in the end I was really proud of. And we premiered it in the Cartoucherie. So we premiered it in, I can't remember what month it was, but we toured it on and off around France for up to 3 or 4 months, and then finished off in the project. Yeah. And the book, you know, was in the sort of like the third or fourth place that we performed in, and that was really special to perform in that theatre. It's an amazing space, and it was really special. And that was when Roddy came over, and you know, the Irish ambassador at the time, Anne Anderson, had this great dinner for us, and it was a really special night. Actually, it was really lovely.
Talking about special things, I mean, you know, you've won obviously loads of awards for your work, but I'm also very struck by your honorary doctorate in philosophy.
Oh yeah. I am so thrilled with that.
You call yourself Dr. Olwen now? Is that your?
No, I think I should. I mean, I saw that Planty Bliss did, Dr. Planty Bliss.
Yeah, I think you should.
You think I should? And yeah. Oh well. No, I was so thrilled about that. I mean, you know, I never had any third level education, and I've often had that thing of, oh, maybe I still can go and have third level education, go to university, study something, and then to be offered that, I was so chuffed. I'm incredibly proud of it.
Yeah. Two last things. Ballyturk. I saw both. I mean, I think that again, you were talking very, very early on about female in non necessarily female roles, and kind of, and I think, you know, your career has kind of really, I mean, obviously you've played roles that are, you know, non-gender based, but you've also played roles across genders, which you just brought yourself as an actor too. And I think Ballyturk was one of this brilliant production and a brilliant play. But also, you know, again, being present at another moment in Irish theatre when the likes of Enda Walsh coming through, and the likes of, you know, Selena Cartmel coming through, and the likes of many other people. And I suppose what I have to remark upon is that you mentioned it earlier on. You always, your career just seems so forward looking. Do you know what I mean? It's not like, it's like you're searching. It's like, and kind of watching you. It's not like, you know, giving someone a lifetime, which you've got, a lifetime achievement award. You're kind of going, yeah, but the best is yet to come. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of, it's like.
I hope so.
but you can see, I mean, it's such an exciting performer to watch, but also hear you talk about your work. It's kind of, it's in the present. Do you know what I mean? And in the future, not necessarily, you know, you can be reminded of processes in the past, but it's not done yet, which is exciting.
Yeah, well, I kind of always, yeah, I'm always interested in what's going to happen next and where it's going to take me. Yeah. So I'm glad you feel that. Yeah.
Yeah, and come here. I have to ask you about Fantastic Beasts. Like was that? I mean, like, you know, it's a whole other universe and kind of world, and, you know, hysteria around those books, and now these new films. Was it like walking into a kind of an alternate universe, kind of being involved in something like that?
Well, not really. I mean, yeah, it's a huge, big production thing, and there was a whole hoo-ha about getting there on time, and because I was filming Mandy at the time, and we were just finishing off Mandy, and they were saying, oh, if you can't get here on Friday morning, you know, they might have to recast, and so we had to do everything to try and get there and the crack of dawn. And then I go and have a costume fitting. I still don't even know my character name. Had I known getting there, I'd have had even more input into the costume. And then sent to this incredible Swiss hotel. I'm sitting there for 3 days, and they say, no, you might be wanted Monday. No, you're not wanted Monday. Have a nice weekend. And, you know, like so little time on set actually compared to the amount of time in this fantastic hotel. But actually going on set was really intimate and nice, you know. David Yates is really, really great to work with. He's very, very personal, you know, personable. It's not like being in a big machine.
Okay.
Yeah, it was actually quite nice. It was only that thing of feeling that you weren't there for very long, so you couldn't really get involved with it very much, you know.
Yeah.
Only 2 or 3 days on set or something like that. And yeah, they did actually add an extra bit, the bit where I come out with the cats that hadn't been in the original. It was only going to be, and they added that bit, and they might have added a bit more had I been available, or I wasn't available. But no, that was great. I mean, the special great thing is the street cred it gives you amongst kids, you know.
I presume, because, like, you know, every inch and centimeter of the Potter world, or, you know, the whole world is kind of known by people that are really into it. So I'd say, I'd say there's a factor there with you now.
No, that was the lovely thing about it. And I love that whole thing about, you know, these kind of nerdy fans. I think it's fantastic. And actually the film that I just done in Bulgaria is a sequel to Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh, wow.
So that's going to be massive in America. So God knows what that's going to be like in terms of, and I'm playing, I'm sure I can say this, you know, the way you have these non-disclosure agreements, but I'm playing the Sally Hardesty, who is the only survivor of the first film. She's the one, you know. I don't seen the film. So, and you know, like, I think even if the film was a flop, it would probably still be huge in America, and there would still be this massive fan base and all that kind of stuff. I find that all quite kind of fantastic and hilarious, and I enjoy it enormously. But I mean, Mandy is another one. The Mandy became a real cult. Has become a real cult. So I remember going to actually a David Byrne concert, wonderful David Byrne concert, American Utopia. Have you seen it?
No, I didn't see it, but I've seen it kind of on. Oh man!
Yeah, you've seen the film. I saw went to see it in Dublin, and I was going up to Sydney to work, and I got in touch with the producer of the company I was working with over in Sydney. He said, "Can you get me 2 tickets? I'll treat you to see David Byrne's going to be in Sydney at the same time as I'm there." So I went to see it in Sydney and got a backstage pass.
Oh.
And I have to send you a photograph of me and David Byrne.
Oh no, that's
But I was so excited. Anyway, how did I get distracted by David Byrne? Where were we?
Everybody.
Oh yeah. So I was at the David Byrne concert in Sydney, and this guy passed me on the steps as we were getting into our seats, and he sort of passed me and he stopped and he turned around and he came back up and he looked at me and said, "You were in Mandy." Like, and the guy I was with was completely said, "I can't believe you came halfway across the world. People say they saw you in Mandy." Anyway, so Mandy's been another actually amazing sort of passport into a whole other world, you know.
I'm still on the backstage pass and David Byrne, to be honest with you, Olwen.
Oh, yeah. And I tell you how I got that was this fantastic singer, Catel Koenig, who we knew each other years ago and got in touch again around that time. And she sent me a message saying, "Oh, I see you're at the David Byrne concert. I was there at the same time and I was backstage, blah, blah." And I said, "Oh God." And then I told her I was going to see him in Sydney. She said, "Will I try and get you backstage pass?" And I said, "Oh God, that'd be fantastic." So that's just got it through her, she knows the guy who's involved in production. So yeah, that was really amazing. Yeah.
Come here, thanks. I'm going to let you go. You've given so much of your time. I just wanted to ask, how are you getting on with the cult? I mean, obviously doing an awful lot of work on film at the moment, but how are you getting on in this mad universe that we're all living in at the moment?
I mean, you know, I think I have a bit of an apocalypse fetish in which I find the fact that the world has been ground to a halt by this alien. who's now in our bodies or in our whole body chain,
Yeah.
whatever. I find that kind of very fascinating. I would love to feel that it's an opportunity, and if I was that way inclined to be saying it's almost like the virus is the messenger, uh, an opportunity to really look at our place on this earth, on this planet, and what we've done to it, and that we are the virus. Really, we are the big virus. So I kind of keep seeing it like that.
Yeah.
I keep hoping that we manage to take this opportunity to reset ourselves in some way, or reset our place in the universe in some way. I don't know if it'll happen. I think that there are so much vested interest in continuing living the way we do. But I would love if it just provoked a really seismic change
Yeah.
in how we live our lives, and how we think.
I mean,
Really,
it's funny,
love.
I fundamentally agree with you, and I think one can't make that happen in a way, but I think the more people that kind of start wishing for that and start talking about that,
Yeah,
it's like a snowball. Do you know what I mean? I think it's kind of, I mean,
yeah,
you mentioned what we've done to the planet, and actually one of May Stone is kind of working with us on a European project around climate adaptation and the arts. And
yeah.
you've worked with May quite, which,
Yeah, Meg, she's fantastic, and I know this is big passionate for her. Yeah,
but I think it is. There's an awful lot of people talking about. I mean, even within the arts, we're never, even though it's all scary and people are losing income and it's horrible in that way. But those of us that are unemployed is like also, we're never going to get this time to reset our own industry either. It's not, because we're all so busy going to the next job.
yeah.
I feel it's kind of, it's timely. But come here, Olwen, thanks so much for taking part in this. It's been an absolute pleasure. I could talk to you for hours more, but I'm going to let you go.
Look, that I talk to you for hours more.
When all this is done, we'll meet for a cup of tea and have a proper conversation. But no, thanks very, very much. It's been an absolute pleasure kind of chatting to you, and look forward to chatting to you properly. Well, not properly, but in the flesh soon.
Okay. Well, look, thank you, and good luck with everything
Cool.
over there.
Thanks a million.